Welcome to the Sensible Center podcast, where two middle-aged guys drunkenly talk politics and political reform. Grab an adult beverage and enjoy the show. Further information can be found at sensiblecenterpack.com. You can reach us at sensiblecenterpack@gmail.com or follow us on X at USASCPack. Hello there, Bob.
Hey, Kevin. Weather's warming up. So is the Supreme Court.
So is the Supreme Court. That's right. They're like a college student. They do all their work in like the last week, right? They put everything off. Yeah, you got Thomas and Gorsuch on a Gorsuch is straight lace, right? Kavanaugh and Thomas like on a bender all year.
Yeah.
Allegedly.
Yeah. That's
and
right.
then they realize
Robert's trying to keep them on a leash, having to go pick them up from the local
summer vacation's
party.
coming, right? They get 3 months off, right? They get July, August, September off, right? They don't start
so. Maybe not this year. Trump's throwing them all to work.
So they're rushing through their work. So I think, what is it, Juneteenth today, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they've got 11 days basically to issue a bunch of rulings, and so we thought we would cover what I consider probably one of the most significant cases in my lifetime that I've seen. And I'm geek enough that I listen to the oral arguments on C-SPAN. They can't show the court. They don't have a camera, but they can include audio from the court. So it's kind of interesting to listen to, in this case, the Solicitor General and then some various states' attorneys argue the case. So the case that we're talking about, Bob, is CASA versus Trump. And if you want to know what CASA is a prominent immigration advocacy organization. So this is technically about birthright citizenship. So back in January, I think on Inauguration Day, after he gave his speech, Trump toddled to the executive office, the Oval Office, and started signing executive orders. So he signed the executive order called Protecting the Meaning and Value of American Citizenship. So just there itself, it's an important case, right? I mean, who's an American? You can't get more essential than that, right?
That's
Are we in
right.
agreement? That's right.
Yep. And, well, it's not just that. Depending on how this decision goes, it matters for people that have been considered citizens for a while now, right? It's not
Yes,
just
it does.
What's in the future, it's what's in the past. And how
That's right.
handled.
It's retroactive. So this executive order specifically said, to quote, citizenship does not extend to, number one, when person's mother, this is how it's stated, when person's mother was unlawfully present in the U.S. and father was not a U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident at the time of said person's birth. So your mother was here illegally, and your father is not a U.S. resident or permanent lawful resident. Trump is saying you're not a citizen. Number two, when person's mother was here lawfully, but temporary. So a student,
vacation,
tourist, or work visa. So it's pretty clear, right, what this is directed at. And personally, I don't necessarily disagree, right? I don't know where you're at on this, but I don't think either somebody who's here illegally or temporary should be able to have a child just because they're within the United States. I didn't bother looking up what other foreign countries do, but I can't imagine too many follow this rule.
I don't think they do. Yeah.
And that automatically makes you a U.S. citizen. So from the direction standpoint, I am not necessarily, I don't know where you're at, but I'm not necessarily against it.
Tell me exactly what the Constitution says.
So the Constitution, we're going back to the 14th Amendment. So the 14th Amendment was in 1868, and it was directed mostly in regards to slavery. So specifically, the 14th Amendment Citizenship Clause says all persons born or naturalized in the United States, I don't know what naturalized means, we can look that up, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, which means you're subject to the laws of the United States, are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. So that's pretty clear. All persons born is pretty clear in the United States. We know our boundaries, right?
Yep.
Our borders, subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Only foreign diplomats are mostly the individuals who are not subject to U.S. law, right?
Yep.
So excluding foreign diplomats or children of foreign diplomats who were born here. So anyone subject to U.S. law, which includes illegals, people here temporarily, are still subject to U.S. law, are citizens of the United States.
So
It's pretty clear, right?
if I'm a judge, based on that, I am going to grant citizenship to those that were born here.
Right. And there's been 4 cases, prominent Supreme Court cases since that time, where the court has ruled even people here illegally, if they have a kid, the kid is a citizen. So there's been cases since then that the court has set precedent. So you never answered the question whether you're like conceptually, do you?
Yeah, conceptually, I don't like the idea of someone
Okay.
stepping over the border, dropping
Right.
a kid, and all of a sudden they've got an anchor, right?
Yeah, I've never seen public opinion polls on this, but my gut is I don't think we're that different than what most Americans would think, right? It just doesn't seem right, right? I mean, it's like you're just here. Let's say you're just here on vacation and you have a kid, and that kid is a U.S. citizen. It seems weird,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, but it's everything. That's what I've known. I can remember being in grade school and studying the Constitution and civics and all that, and this was a big point of conversation during that time period. And I always thought that, I guess you could call it propaganda, right? But it's one of the things that makes the country great. You're born here, you become an American citizen, and American citizenship is a bit of prestige around the world. At least we advertise it to ourselves as such, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of course, when I was 10 years old, I wasn't thinking about the implications of millions of people pouring over our border and this exasperating the issue, right?
That's right,
So,
and clearly that's why this is being brought up at this stage, right? I mean, it's a political thing, and it's driven by all the people who've come over our border either through asylum or sneaking over or overstaying their visas, or so I think that's why we're talking about it now. But I think it's pretty clear cut that this is, like you said, you've learned about it in civics, and we've always kind of understood that to be the case, and there's a long precedent. So Trump issuing the executive order saying, this is, I'm going to change this with a swipe of a pen,
can't
I
do it.
think it's pretty clear cut that he can't do that. I mean, you need to amend the Constitution, I think, is basically the case. So I think from that standpoint, this is really clear cut. But there's another really interesting part of this that I think is much more consequential, even though we talked about birthright citizenship being a huge thing, but I think the legal aspect of that is pretty cut and dry, and I don't think he has a leg to stand on in that regard, even though they've argued that. But I think what really brought this case to the forefront was, so Trump did the executive order, right? And within 3 days, he lost 4 district court cases, and a nationwide injunctive relief was issued. So by January 23rd, the lower courts had basically said, you can't, with a laugh and a guffaw, they said, you can't do this, right?
Yep,
Which is our system working, right, to some extent?
correct. On the surface, and if you limit that conversation to the
this
immediate subject.
specific, right.
Yep.
That's where it gets interesting, right? So the administration is fighting the district court's ability to grant this relief. So nationwide injunctive relief is not a legal term, so the counts of how many have been issued have varied, but it's a growing thing, right? I think it's growing partly because our Congress is broken, and so executive orders are more common. And so I think the executive is sort of pushing the boundaries of what they could do, even going back to Bush, Obama, and now Trump is clearly using the executive orders as a way to work around Congress.
It's
So
red meat for the base too.
right. So in regards to this injunctive relief, it's happened 127 times in the last 60 years, between 63 and 2023. 12 under G.W. Bush, 19 under Obama, 55 under Trump's first administration, 14 under Biden, and 17 within the first 2 months of Trump. So Trump is setting a real strong pace. Mm-hmm. So he's got 17 cases where he said, I want to do this, and some district court judge, right?
Said you can't
I think there's hundreds of districts, if I'm not wrong. Political, they're Democrats or Republicans, right?
Yeah.
Is saying, I'm going to limit the power of the president. So that's a reasonable thing to talk about, right? Can somebody in some court in who knows where say, hey, Mr. President, I'm going to issue not only for my district, but for the whole United States, saying what you think you could do doesn't apply. It's a good check and balance, and this is kind of the way it's worked.
It is a federal judge.
It is a federal judge. They are elected officials, right? I believe.
Appointed,
or they're appointed.
Well, they're appointed and then approved by Congress, I believe.
So one of the things, the issue would be venue shopping, right? So
yes, that's a problem.
Yeah. So lawyers are wise. They go, well, this judge here we know what their rulings are. We know what their ideology is. We know how they view things. We'll just file the case in that court and we'll still get nationwide relief. So that and that one district court judge could basically stop, executive and legislative branch actions. So I think that's really interesting, and especially Trump is clearly, he's talked about judges, he's demeaned judges, and I think this is kind of the case that brings this all to the forefront, whether this can actually happen. So this case came up for oral argument in May 15th. And it's really interesting. Like I said, I listened to the C-SPAN argument. It's really interesting when they go before the justices. It's different than, and I encourage people to do it. I don't know if you've ever listened to him, Bob.
I usually, after the fact, I don't turn on C-SPAN in the middle of an argument. Rarely, if ever.
Yeah, it's really interesting because it's
Obamacare
basic.
Back then I may have, but anyway.
Yeah, it's really interesting because the arguments are like, and I could read the government's. I'll read the government's argument. It takes like a minute or two, and so does the other side, because the key is all question and answer, which is kind of interesting, right? The justices all kind of, and I think you pointed out to me that, or somebody pointed out to me that in this case, Sotomayor was taking up too much time and cutting off people, and Roberts was getting upset, the Chief Justice. So there's that interaction between the justices, and they just kind of just throwing out questions like what ifs, and it's really interesting that the highest court in the land,
leading, yeah,
that the highest court in the land operates. Because if you watch like a case on TV, I've been watching this Karen Reed case, which is a criminal case. There's all sorts of rules and objections and whatever, and then you get to the Supreme Court, and it's basically, it's loose.
Yeah,
which is kind of interesting. There's really not that many rules, and the arguments are short, and they're looking for quick answers, and which I really like. I mean, it's kind of entertaining. So
yeah, it's usually a day or even like half.
Oh
a day
yeah,
or less,
it takes an hour or two. I mean, they're ruling on. I mean, they're looking at, clearly they've got the clerks and whatever, and they're doing the reading on the side, but the actual getting in front of the court and arguing and them questioning the people in the case, it's a couple hours at best. So this is what the inspector general is the person who brings the case for who would represent the president in this case. So he basically says multiple district courts promptly issued nationwide or universal injunctions blocking this order, the order regarding birthright citizenship, and a cascade of such universal injunctions followed. Since January 20th, district courts had now issued 40 universal injunctions against the federal government, including 5 from the same 5 judicial districts. That's the venue shopping we're talking about, right? So most of them have been just from 5 judicial districts. This is a bipartisan problem that has now spanned the last 5 presidential administrations, which we talked about. Universal injunctions exceed the judicial power granted. As you can see, this is their argument. They're not really talking about birthright citizenship. They're getting right to the district courts. Universal injunctions exceed the judicial power granted in Article 3 of the Constitution, which exists only to address the injury to the complaining party. They transgress the traditional bounds of equitable authority, and they create a host of practical problems. Such injunctions prevent the percolation of novel and difficult legal questions. They encourage rampant forum shopping. They require judges to make rushed, high-stakes, low-information decisions. They circumvent Rule 23 by offering all the benefits but none of the burdens of class certification, which we'll get into. They operate asymmetrically, forcing the government to win everywhere, while the plaintiffs can win anywhere, which is true, right? You only have to win in one, and you win the whole thing. The government's got to win every case. They invert the ordinary hierarchy of appellate review. They create the ongoing risk of conflicting judgments. They increase which means you could have 2 district courts offering different rulings, right?
Yeah.
They increase the pressures on this court's emergency docket, the Supreme Court's. They create I'm almost done. They create what Justice Powell described as repeated and essentially head-on confrontations between the life-tenured and representative branches of government, basically between the judiciary and the elected executive and Congress. And they disrupt the Constitution's careful balancing of the separation of powers. So this really gets to the core of how our government operates, right? That's the whole argument. That's all he argued, and then it went to questions.
One of the big points there is, to me, it forces the government to win anywhere or everywhere, and the plaintiff just needs to win anywhere, right?
Yep.
You turn that around, and you're getting into double jeopardy, right? If the government could just challenge a defendant anywhere, just has to get one guilty verdict to get him, that's double jeopardy or worse. That's a problem. That said, me being a small government guy, when I really think about it, having the opportunity to have somebody stand up against the government and win is an attractive thing, right? Because you got to remember, right now Trump might be in office, but Biden was in office doing things, or his aides were, because I'm not sure Biden was competent. Off subject, sorry.
The auto pen
Not
was
that long
competent.
ago,
The
right?
auto pen was competent.
Yeah, there you go. So the question, if it wasn't for courts being able to stop some of what he was doing or did or they were doing, things would potentially be worse, in my view, today, right? Because the government, it's a much larger issue, right? Probably what we're doing here, and I'll let you get back on topic, is we're looking past the actual root cause here, which is executive orders and the like, and the executive branch potentially overstepping its bounds more so than the court system. That just
I mean, so you're saying, I'm surprised you're saying this. You're saying the risk is more with the power of the executive. So you like the idea that an individual citizen could say, Mr. Trump, the Constitution says this, right? Trump could always sign the executive order. They're not going to throw him in jail for violating the Constitution, although he took an oath, right? Mm-hmm. and I don't think this one's open to interpretation, even though they can, like I said, the argument.
Well, he's already been granted immunity for presidential.
Oh, wait!
Right?
I left out. Sorry, I left out the beginning part of the argument. So he did cover the birthright citizenship. He said, and this is quick, on January 20th, President Trump issued Executive Order 14160 protecting the meaning and value of American citizenship. This order reflects the original meaning of the original meaning. This is what they're saying. This is their whole argument, which guaranteed citizenship to children of former slaves, not to illegals or temporary visitors. That's all they argued on the birthright citizenship. That the original meaning, I don't know where they're, I guess they were looking at notes.
Original meaning is one thing, but it's not in the paper. I mean, it's the same argument the opposite side has when it comes to the Second Amendment. The original meaning was must.
Yeah. So they did.
Okay.
Yeah. Because it's reading the tea leaves, right? When you always talk about original meaning.
You can't do that.
Right. So he did cover it off the top, but this is not what this case is about, because, as you said, it's clear cut in this case. But you seem to say that as a citizen, you should be able to raise your hand and say, "I'm going to bring a case," or in this case, a nonprofit organization who protects immigrants says, "Wait a second, Mr. President, you can't do that. I'm going to file a case in this court and get a ruling."
Yep.
Now, that's all well and good. I like that,
same
right?
That follows Chevron. If you think about the Chevron thing we talked about months ago, it's the same sort of thing, right? Some regulatory agency making up some arbitrary rule that doesn't have the backing of the other branches of government or Congress specifically. It's a problem, right? And this is just an extension of that.
So you like that idea. But do you like that it's nationwide?
On the surface, if I'm thinking with my heart, emotionally, I don't like it, right? But if I'm thinking with my head, knowing that Trump is going to be out of office in 4 years, and some of what he's done I don't particularly like anyway, there's always going to be a next guy, right? And that next guy may be aligned with my political beliefs, may not be. He or she may not be aligned with my political beliefs. And if I give away the right, similar to, we can take it back to Harry Reid and changing the laws in Congress when it came to appointing judges, what happened when he did that? Well, next thing you know, Trump's in office in his first term, and it's a lot easier to get his judges pushed through, right? This is the same sort of thing. Supreme Court takes this ability to challenge the president in this manner, or at least stop potentially illegal activity from happening, or activity in violation of the Constitution from happening. Take that away. It's going to apply 6 years from now, and 12 years from now, 18 years from now, and we don't know who the president's going to be in any of those over that time period.
Right.
That's how I look at it. So, yeah, I think I want to limit the power of the government. And if the Supreme Court changes this, it's going to expand the power of the government.
So here's what the government argues. So the government says, well, this doesn't really make sense. I mean, I do have a little bit of a problem with I do have a definite problem with forum shopping.
Yeah, but that's a different argument. I agree. I have a problem with that too.
Well, what's the argument? I don't know. I mean, the argument is that I could bring a case against the President of the United States with a judge that I know is against the President of the United States, and I could stop the President from doing something. I
don't like the forum shopping. I think you need to get rid of that some way. But what I'm saying is, if a judge says this is constitutional, if a federal judge says this is constitutionally illegal and makes the decision,
right,
it's in the best interest of the country for an injunction to be placed on whatever the question is, not permanently, but until it can be sorted out in court. I think that's fine. For me, what I don't like, again, is the forum shopping. That's a problem.
Right. This is an emergency injunction, just to be clear. It's saying, okay, we're stopping this from happening, right? These people are still citizens. It doesn't end the case, right? I mean, there's appellate. The case could still, as it has, go up to the Supreme Court, right? It could go through the process. So the government is arguing a couple things here. One, they're saying, well, we shouldn't necessarily grant. One alternative is we shouldn't necessarily grant this power to district judges. We should let it percolate. They use the word percolate. Like, let several cases, kind of be filed around the country. Get several different rulings, right? Get rulings on one side and on the other. Let it percolate a while. Now, God knows what happens in the. They didn't really discuss what happens in the interim, right? Because once the executive order's signed, it's technically the law of the land, I think, until somebody stops it, right?
Yeah, correct.
So if he's the government, the Solicitor General actually argued like, well, we don't need to jump to conclusions. Let's let these cases play themselves out for a while, right? Well, what? The people born here during that time are not citizens? I mean, there are certain things that
Well, you
need.
could go back. The court could go back and say, okay, this wasn't valid. So anybody documented to be have been born. I mean, you would still grant a birth certificate at any hospital, right?
Yeah, I mean, then you got to go back retroactively. I mean, it could get messy, right?
Okay.
If we let these, especially if he's signing lots of executive orders, right? And there's lots of these cases, people really don't know where to head. It's sort of like the tariffs, right? You don't. It creates a lot of uncertainty, uh, especially in regards to something essential as if is this a citizen of the United States or not.
And
So,
I do think Trump's doing a lot of this stuff intentionally to get this stuff out there and
oh
document it.
yeah,
And
I mean it's clearly a
while he has
they
the
want
court,
these rulings, right? The court is. I don't necessarily think it's as packed as he thought it was. I would say because when you listen to it, I would say uh, Coney Barrett is not.
she's a lot more liberal than
Yeah, she's a lot more liberal than I think she amongst any of them is more. Even Gorsuch is pretty libertarian.
I like Gorsuch a lot.
Kavanaugh's I think less conservative than they originally
He's
imagined.
more Roberts.
Right. Roberts is definitely more in the middle. So I don't think the Heritage Foundation did a great job of picking these judges.
Yeah.
From the standpoint of what
Like
they
I said, I
wanted to
think
achieve,
Gorsuch was
right?
amazing. I like Clarence Thomas. Once he leaves, I hope they can find another one.
Yeah, you've got Clarence and Alito are clearly the far right,
Yeah.
very conservative reading of everything, and I think they would favor more the executive power than not.
That
But
said, I think Ketanji Brown Jackson is absolutely horrible and seems to have no real, even she doesn't even pretend to reason. That's my opinion.
right, but the interesting thing about this percolation thing, and the justices brought it up in their questioning. They're like, okay, let's say the government loses a bunch of these cases, right? Let's say you're saying you want a bunch of different rulings, and in this case, the birthright citizenship, I think it's pretty clear that they would lose on every aspect, right? So then, if the government's losing, what's the incentive of the government? And this is a question they asked: what's the incentive of the government to appeal those cases? Who's going to bring that to the higher court, right? So if you're saying, well, we're not going to let injunctive relief happen, we're just going to let all these rulings happen, then who brings the case? Because the plaintiff is winning, right? They
Hmm.
can't appeal a winning verdict. The government needs to appeal the winning verdict, right? The losing verdict. And they actually said, you would never bring these cases to us. We'd
Right.
never hear them. There would just be all these district court rulings that didn't grant national injunctive relief. They would have just granted relief to that person, whoever particularly brought the case, right? And we would never be able to rule, which I thought was an interesting argument because that's actually what would occur.
That's
So
correct.
I think they shot that down. That was one of the alternatives. The other alternative that the government argued was you're familiar with class action lawsuits, right?
Yes.
So the government was arguing here. It's really about the nationwide injunctive relief. So Joe Blow, file a lawsuit against the government in regards to birthright citizenship or for whatever issue. whatever relief is granted by the court should only apply to me, right? This is
Correct.
what the government was arguing. I'm the
Mm-hmm.
only one filing the suit, right?
Yep.
Why should it apply to somebody else? And during the questioning, I think Coney Bryant asked this.
Tony Barrett,
Coney Bryant. Who's Coney Bryant?
related to Kobe Bryant.
Yeah, that's right. Justice Kobe Bryant. You're probably right. That's the
Rest
bourbon.
his soul.
That's the bourbon speaking. That's rest his soul. Anyways, she said, "Okay, let's put this theoretical. So I file a lawsuit against a corporation who's polluting the river right in front of my house, right? And I win relief from that, right? The corporation needs to clean up the water or whatever.
And stop
Let's
dumping
let's
stuff
say
in
I
the-
move to another state and somebody moves into my house, but the corporation starts polluting the water again. The
Yeah.
government is arguing, I got to refile a lawsuit against the corporation because I wasn't the original one to file the case. The case only applied to the guy who used to own the property, right?
So what does the Constitution say?
Yeah, that's the question. I mean, they get into this Article 3 stuff. It's not really clear. That's where you get into this class action thing, which is this Rule 23, which deals with class actions. And Rule 23, because class actions say, okay, everyone in this town is part of the class, right? Because we're all going to be affected by whatever this ruling is. So you can opt out of a class, you can whatever, but there's ways to get class certification where you get a group of people. Because that's the way you get a ruling applied to a larger group, be it, tobacco settlements, right? We all know the large class action lawsuits, right? Not everyone who smoked individually filed a lawsuit against the tobacco companies. They basically said, well, if you smoke cigarettes, you're part of this class, and you can opt out. You could file your own lawsuit, but unless you opt out, we're including you as part of the class. Have you ever been part of a class action lawsuit? Have you ever gotten money?
I've been part of a few. Yeah, you get. I think the largest sum I ever got was maybe $250.
Yeah, there was
Some you get $2. I
Yeah,
don't like class actions for that reason. Lawyers make a whole lot of money.
They do make a lot of money. That's definitely the case.
and the problem is you never really get restitution, right? I won't name the company, but there was a company relatively recently that leaked my social security number online, right? Created all kinds of problems for me. Or, well, I should say, potentially has created all kinds of problems for me. I had to take action to protect myself, which everyone should do proactively anyway. That said, I could file a lawsuit. It's going to take many, many years, or I could join a class action lawsuit, which means less energy, less risk to me, but I'm going to get an amount that is drastically less than really the value of the damage that was done, right? I think, generally speaking, class action lawsuits have hurt people's ability to get restitution. I really think so. I don't like class action lawsuits for that reason. All they do is enrich lawyers and keep money flowing through the judicial system.
Yeah, and in this case, the government arguing that is another alternative too. That okay, we have a system to have classes certified, so we don't need the district court to issue a district judge to issue nationwide injunctive relief. All we need is a big enough class, right?
Yep.
So Kagan had a question. So she's like, let's assume in this case you're dead wrong, which is the truth because we're talking about birthright citizen. How do we get that result? Does every single person that is affected by this EO have to bring their own suit? Are there alternatives? How long would it take? How do we get to the result that there's a single rule of citizenship that is the rule that we've historically applied rather than rule the EO would have us do? And the Inspector General says Rule 23, which is the class action, would be one natural path, assuming that a class could be certified, which we might dispute in this particular case. So this is the funny thing. He's offering that as an alternative. And she goes back, well, you might dispute it. As you know, I mean, I think the question is there a class that's just all the children of people who have entered illegally? Is that as an appropriate class? Can that be the same thing be done under Rule 23? Or are you going to tell me that Rule 23 has lots of requirements and you'll never be able to certify the class?
Mm-hmm.
And basically he said, well, we challenge the class anyway. So basically he's saying, they called them out on this being an alternative. It's not an alternative. You'd have to have a huge class, and to have a class, you have to have people like in the same circumstances, right?
Yep.
And all people would fall under this birthright citizenship, they all have different circumstances, right? Their mother could have been here on a student visa, or they could have crossed the border illegally, or they could have been granted an asylum, or they could have been here on vacation. It's hard to certify a class of those people.
Let me ask this. What if there was damage to the individual as a result of them being granted birthright citizenship? It's possible, right? Maybe the country they would have been granted citizenship and would have given them better welfare benefits or lower taxes or, I don't know, more respect, whatever it happens to be, right? You say it. What if there's damage as a result of being granted that citizenship and they don't want it?
So you're asking that, well, I think you could always, what do they call it? Deny your citizenship. I think you can always do that. I don't think
15 years after it's granted to you?
Yeah, sure. I think we could do it now if we wanted.
So
you want to do it?
If they're automatically placed
I don't think
in
you
this
have
class
to have
action, if they're automatically placed in this class action
right?
without being consulted.
Well, that's how class actions usually. Well, they usually will send out a notice, right?
Yeah.
I get notice of, okay, we think you're part of this class, right? Based upon data or demographic information, we think you might be part of this class. So here's your chance to opt out of this class, right? And there's always a way to opt out, which means you reserve your rights, right? You can file a separate lawsuit if you want, or you can be part of this class. So your point is what in regards to this?
So my point is, well, the point I heard, or one of the things I heard you say earlier was they're assumed to be part of this class unless they take action to opt out.
Yes.
Right.
That's usually how it works. Yeah.
Right. So I'm just going to go out on a branch here and say many immigrants are poor, even the younger ones. So many are not going to be technologically advanced and may not have an email address, may not easily be accessible. They have no idea if they're part of this or not. Right?
So you're saying they might not want it.
They might not want it.
And not know about it.
And by being automatically included in this, it potentially creates legal problems for them down the road if they're trying to make an argument in their home country, quote unquote, that they deserve some land that they had to forfeit because of the fact that they're not a citizen or because they have dual citizenship or whatever the case may be.
Yeah,
I
don't think it's any different than if a district court ruled you're included in that group of people anyway, right? So you're not part of a class, but by granting nationwide injunctive relief, you're included just by the district court saying, if you fall within this situation, this is what's going to happen. So I don't think I think you're actually, as an individual, you're benefited by knowing you're part of a class and being able to opt out of that if you want. But I think the point is the government, again, is arguing, the government being Donald Trump in this case, because this is Casa versus Trump, is making a bullshit argument that, okay, Joe Blow, you could actually create a group of people that would file this lawsuit. So the district court wouldn't be issuing, injunctive relief for the nation. They'd just be issuing it for this class, and you can include everyone in the class and basically the justices were saying, yeah, but you would then say, yeah, you can't include everyone in a class.
I have to believe this class action conversation has been had before, right? You've had to have some class action lawsuit against some company that has been challenged by the company.
Oh, sure, it happens all the time.
But I mean,
I mean,
at the Supreme
that's
Court
why the
level,
justices were saying it's there are lots of requirements to get a class. They call it certified because, as you can imagine, you're including people who might not know it in a lawsuit, right?
hmm
They might not agree to it. They might get a card in the mail, they might get an email, but who's paying attention to that? And if you don't opt out, you're automatically included in the class, which so it's hard to certify a class because of that. You're sticking people with that judgment. They're not hiring a lawyer to file that suit, right? They're being grouped into a group of people a little bit against their will, right? Unless they pay attention and say, no, I don't want to be included in this, right?
correct.
As you said, a lot of money goes to the lawyer, so a lot of people might not want to be included in it, but then get included, and the lawyers get a bigger fee because there's more people in the class. It's kind of a little bit of a scam, a little bit. So it's hard to certify a class because you have to say, here's everyone. I think they even have to say,
I got
here's
excluded that way one time.
here's the information of the people we know. Here's how we determine this. We know all these people are X, Y, and Z. They did X, Y, and Z because we've got all this information. So it's hard to get a class certified. And so the argument here is this is not an alternative to nationwide injunctive relief. So they shot down two of them. They shot down the percolation. They shot down the class action. And the third thing the government argued as an alternative to what this nationwide injunctive relief is. And they said, well, the Supreme Court can rule before even any lower court rulings. We don't. So if the Supreme Court really cared, they could reach down, right? I think they have the power to do this. Not wait for district court rulings and say, we're going to rule on this,
I
right?
think it has to be appealed directly to the Supreme Court. But yes,
No, I think they have in certain. I think there's certain standards and requirements under which cases they can do it. But this is what the government was arguing. They're like, well, if you really cared, you can jump, you could jump the process, right? You can, if it's so important to you, you can do it. We don't need the district courts to rule for everyone. You're the big wig in the land, right? You're the top court in the land. You're the final say. Why don't you just go find these cases that are going to impact lots of people, and you do the ruling before it kind of boils up to you. And I don't think they bought that. They don't like one. The Supreme Court doesn't like a lot of work, right?
right.
They've got their cushy lifetime jobs. They're like, you mean we're going to have to go look for stuff?
Yeah.
And what is the standard by which we're going to decide that, which cases we're gonna bring to ourselves, right? And it is kind of jumping the process, right? It's not standard practice. So what are the measures to do that? Plus, you guys seem to be flooding the zone with all these executive orders. We don't have time for all of this, right?
Yeah.
We don't have time to monitor the whole judicial system to see what cases are coming up and then develop standards for bringing it to us. We kind of wait to see what happens and let the appellate court come through and whatnot. So I don't think they were buying that one either. So kind of to kind of sum it up, so the government offered those alternatives, but it really gets down to. So I think I'm actually more torn about this than you are. Because I do like that one person can bring a case as a citizen to stop something they feel is unconstitutional, and I don't like piecemeal oh, this applies here or this applies in this state. And that's why the states brought it up, because they're like, well, we need to know who's a citizen and who's not from the standpoint of how much money we get, benefits, everything. They need to know who's a citizen or not.
States are getting money and
Right.
congressional seats off of non-citizens today.
Well,
That's a loophole that shouldn't be there, really. But I mean, the funding is based on the census, and
right,
we're counting
population.
illegals
Right.
in the census. And
Right, population. But
yeah.
there are other things that citizenship matters from a funding standpoint and a legal standpoint. So they need to know who's a citizen or not. So that's why they were bringing the case. They're like, we kind of need to know too. So I kind of don't like the piecemeal thing, but then I also don't like that a district court judge could stop everything, right?
For
I don't like the forum shopping. I don't.
Yeah.
I mean, I get back to, okay, 35 of these injunctions have come from 5 district courts, which is probably like 2% of the courts,
right? Let me propose this, right?
I don't like that.
Like, forum shopping is one thing, but you're not exactly forum shopping if you grab some individual or entity from that exact district and then submit the lawsuit. So,
that is the definition of forum shopping.
Well,
I mean, you can always find somebody from that district, right?
Yeah, you can.
Right.
You can, but I mean, if you live in a district, you deserve representation at the same time.
Yeah, but that's the idea that these lawsuits they could be filed by, I mean, there's money that looks after these lawsuits, ideological money, right? They like, well, we're going to fight this, and we know that this court, and so we're going to find, they find the plaintiff, whoever the plaintiff is. In this case, it was a nonprofit organization. I don't even know what district this was filed in, but I don't like that either. That I don't like the politicalization of the judiciary. I really don't like that.
I can't stand it.
I don't know how we get out of that. I mean, Trump has made it worse because he views everything from that perspective.
I don't think Trump.
He's pointed a
Harry Reid had nothing to do with Trump, and
he's
Harry
pointed
Reid
a flashlight on it. He's made it. He's made it. Hey, if you rule against me, you have to be doing it on an ideological basis. I don't buy that. That's BS. But I don't like. I'd like to think that judges aren't ideologically based, but obviously we all have our viewpoints of things, and things are open to interpretation, right? The law is open to interpretation. One person will say it says this thing, one will say it says another thing. That's just the way humans are, and that's the language and whatnot. Yeah, I just don't like it saying, okay, this is a Democrat, this is an Obama-appointed judge. They shouldn't even say that. And this is a Trump-appointed judge. Although lots of Trump-appointed judges or Bush-appointed judges are ruling against Trump. So that gives you some basis. But I don't like that being part of our thinking here. And I think
but just because Obama appointed the judge doesn't mean it wasn't a conservative Senate.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, that's why I don't like it. I mean, you read an article now, and I don't remember it being the case before, but I read an article about a ruling, and it will always say who appointed the judge. I don't like that.
Yeah.
They shouldn't even include that in there, because then
it just
automatically,
division.
right, it creates the impression that everything is political, and we can't trust this or we shouldn't follow that. I just think that's a bad concept. So, again, that's why I don't like this, but I don't see the alternative here. So, kind of sum it up, I think Trump is going to lose on both aspects on this. I think he's going to lose on the birthright citizenship, and I don't think they're going to change what's happening on the district court basis. I don't know what you think.
No, I think based on our conversation and based on what the Constitution says and based on what the conversation from the judges during the hearing, I think he's going to lose on both too. He should. That said, I'll qualify that by saying if you look back on the ruling on the overturn of Roe versus Wade, I can't remember the name of that case, but they kind of went further than what the case was that was brought to them when they overturned it, right? They went past not just the question of whatever the case was, but they said our original decision was wrong, and we're going to overturn this.
Right.
So there is some opportunity here for them to kind of pick this apart a little bit and say, A, birthright citizenship, as it's written in the Constitution, stands. There it is. B, we're going to continue to allow injunctions. It's legal, but they could stand and say, you know, forum shopping has to stop. That could happen. I don't know what they would say to resolve that, but they could say that.
Yeah, I would think, my guess is, yeah, they're going to say something. Because, I mean, it's such a big issue, and it's such an important issue. I think they have to at least move the ball somewhere, right? I mean, they need to set a standard somewhere. I hope they don't just punt. I hope because like I said, I'm not totally comfortable with it. I don't like the alternatives that the government suggested in any way, shape, or form. So I can't imagine, and it didn't seem like they liked it either. Yeah. So I can't imagine them going in some, like, stopping that injunctive relief thing and saying, no, we're the only forum that can rule on these things for a nationwide basis. I can't imagine them going that far, but they need to do something.
10 years ago, I would have expected them to punt, to be honest with you. John Roberts loves to punt, and he did it all the time. Yeah, it's the political environment and makeup of the court doesn't allow for that so much anymore. So, yeah, it's kind of interesting to me. I don't know.
Well, I guess we'll see shortly. We should have a ruling, and if you're listening to this, look at Trump versus Casa. It could come out tomorrow. Who knows?
Good. Or tomorrow being Friday the 20th. Yeah.
Yep. So they typically issue and post their opinions. I'm sure this one will be one that is reported on the news stations and talked about. So look for that and see whether we're right, wrong, or indifferent. But I think it's on many levels a very important case. So thanks for listening. Got anything else, Bob? What were you drinking tonight? Sounded good.
Hey, great question. Baker 7, Jim Beam product.
Baker 7.
How about you?
I was just drinking my last of my... You saw that they released a new Eagle Rare, right? A 12-year, I think.
Yeah.
I saw
that
pictures.
On the shelf?
I saw pictures. No, I saw pictures that they released it at the distillery on Sunday because I saw pictures of huge lines at Buffalo Trace.
I saw those too. Yeah.
So I don't think it's hit the stores yet. I don't know how they're releasing it.
They actually had to shut down the parking lot, which I'm not sure they've done before, but they said no more people in.
So I'm sure you can find it in your clubs. Somebody selling it for a high price, but
I was out west last week, and I sat down at this bar for lunch, and they had a bottle of Double Eagle Rare, $600 a shot, or $600 an ounce.
So how'd it taste?
Yeah, I didn't buy it. The bottle was closed. And I asked the bartender, I said, is that a Double Eagle Rare? He said, yeah, it's Double Eagle Rare. We've had it for a while. Nobody's asked for a shot yet. He said, at happy hour, I might be able to get you half off on that. I've never actually tried. So it would have been $300 an ounce, right? But he's like,
see if it
it's
runs
been so long that
register.
It's been sitting there, they may actually let me do it. And I said, no, I'm not paying $300 an ounce for that either. But it was still pretty cool to see it because I've never seen a bottle. So
how much
rare.
would you have paid an ounce? Would you pay $100?
I would say, yeah, I would do that.
You'd pay
probably. But I'm not sure what the MSRP on the bottle is. I'm guessing or thinking it's probably around $2,500.
Oh, really?
All
right, so $100 would be a good deal.
Yeah, I probably, but I'd also think I probably would have been disappointed by it. You know what I mean?
Yep.
I don't know.
Anyways, so good deal. Hope you enjoyed the podcast, and we will talk to you guys soon.
Cheers.
Talk to you later, Bob.